Devan Dubnyk's been a star in the Stanley Cup playoffs so far. So has Jonas Hiller, and so has a guy named Scott Darling playing for the Chicago Blackhawks. I'm joined by Steve Simmons of the Toronto Sun and Cam Cole of Post Media News to discuss playoff goaltending, the good and the bad. Let's start with Steve in Toronto. Can you explain it, and who's going to stand out from here on in?
Well, you can always explain it. There's really two kinds of successful goalies in the NHL. There's great goalies and there's hot goalies. And we're in the second round of the playoffs, so we know that Henrik Lundqvist is a great goalie. We know that Carey Price is a great goalie. And we know that Braden Holtby in Washington had a great season. And we saw Dubnyk in Minnesota had a great second half. So you've got guys who have been either hot or have pedigree. And I think sometimes at this point in time, who do you turn to? Who wins Stanley Cups for the most part? The guys with pedigree. And I think that's what you'll see this year. Although Corey Crawford in Chicago is a bit of a different story.
Okay, Cam, do you believe in this pedigree idea as we go to the second round?
I believe in hot, really. I have recollections of a lot of goalies that didn't have particularly great pedigrees going into the playoffs that just played on real good teams, the Chris Osgoods and guys of that ilk. I think if you have a good enough team, okay goaltending that just gets hot at the right time will do the job for you. And that's why I'm not 100% sold on the New York Rangers or the Montreal Canadiens, even though those two goaltenders clearly are the cream of the crop.
Well, last year Henrik Lundqvist took the Rangers to the Stanley Cup final. They lost 3 games in different kinds of overtimes. So that was a closer final than you might think. This is a better Rangers team now, deeper on the back end. They brought in Keith Yandel. They brought in some other players that helped them in the back end. And I think you add that defense to that goaltending, awfully tough to beat the New York Rangers in the East.
I just have a problem with the Rangers because they're such an uninteresting team, or they play an uninteresting kind of hockey. I'm not saying that that isn't an effective kind of hockey in today's NHL, but a lot of 2-1 sort of hockey games doesn't really do it for me.
Steve, I know that you're picking the Chicago Blackhawks to win the Stanley Cup. They, of course, have Corey Crawford, and he's the only one of the remaining starting goalies in the Stanley Cup playoffs who's actually won a Stanley Cup. Is that not worth something, having that guy with that experience?
Yes and no, because Corey Crawford's kind of an odd goalie. He's the kind of guy you're always wondering about. You watch him and you see him have a bad game and you wonder if the next game's going to be better. And he has a good record and good stats, but sometimes he lets in some really terrible goals. And so he's one of these up and down guys that you don't ever know whether to trust him or not, but he's won the cup, so you give him that little point because of that.
Well, Cam and Steve, thank you for joining me. I hope we can chat again before the start of the conference finals.